Good morning and welcome to the Michigan Co-op November 2021 webinar. My name is Lisa Sitkins and I facilitate the Michigan Co-op. The Michigan Co-op is a group of school districts who network with one another to share innovative best practices and the challenges and successes that go along with those innovative practices. Today, I'll be moderating our discussion as we hear from a panel of researchers and Michigan Co-op superintendents about the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute study that was completed earlier this year around student-centered learning. But before we get to that, I'd like to turn it over to our sponsor, which is the Student Achievement Systems and their Pulse program. So Brian and John, could you please introduce yourselves and then tell us about Pulse?
Sure thing. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me do that real quick. So I'm Brian Erickson. I'm here with John Sorensen, our CEO, and I am the marketing director. And can everybody see my
Yes.
My opening slide there? Okay. All right, thanks. Well, I'm very excited to introduce you to our cloud-based software product called Pulse. We gave the product this name because it helps educators keep their finger on the pulse of their virtual classrooms and how their remote students are doing. The number of virtual students enrolled in remote classes and virtual programs grew over 300% in the past decade. After the 2020 pandemic, enrollment is expected to increase even more through expanded distance learning offerings and new virtual schools and academies. However, pass rates and other metrics for online curriculums has been steadily declining, which means we're teaching more students in an environment that has not been fully optimized for student success. We all know that so much of teaching success relies on in-person engagement, being able to walk up and down the aisles of desks and literally see and hear how a student is doing at any moment. In a virtual environment, this is impossible. What educators need is a solution that gives them the next best thing to being there. So the central feature of Pulse is a powerful dashboard that gives educators just that. Now, teachers no longer need to dig through multiple learning management systems and student information systems or create their own spreadsheets to understand how all their remote students are doing right now in real time up to the minute. The dashboard aggregates data points from several other disparate systems, allowing teachers to make on-target decisions to best help students. Key areas tracked include student login frequency, hours engaged, progress made, and most recent communications. And teachers can drill down on each data point for a deeper understanding of the metrics. Pulse's comprehensive color-coded metrics indicators are like a heat map of a virtual classroom, where teachers can quickly identify trouble spots. All the different tools that educators currently use to manage their virtual classrooms have their strength areas, but only Pulse sees the student as a complete holistic picture. Pulse bridges together several gaps in online student engagement. Where Pulse really excels is giving you a real-time view into these tools while replacing the need for these tools. I wanted to give you a closer look at the teacher dashboard. While at first glance it may seem overwhelming, think of it as your classroom sitting there in front of you, and each row is a real-time view of your students' progress or lack thereof. And the dashboard is just the beginning. Many online educators rely on social media groups and texting to engage with their students, not Pulse users. They have a safe, secure messaging center and chat app that allows them to chat with students individually or send custom messages to the entire class. Unlike the social media apps, ours is integrated with a school's IT security infrastructure. And best of all, every engagement and conversation is monitored, archived, and reviewable. And here's a closer view of that drill down on a student's information. And finally, just another small sampling of our features. Here's the teacher log of all engagement and communications with their students. When Pulse is integrated into a school's student support and monitoring effort, it can help make significant improvements in student outcomes. Link Learning is a 13-school virtual conglomerate with 1,800 alternative education students. Pulse was first implemented during the 2016-17 school year and has driven improved graduation rate performance over that time. Three Rivers is one of Link Learning's most successful schools. Leaders of this school embraced the Pulse tool completely. The results were promising in that the virtual program was able to outperform a seated alternative ed program in the same market. And finally, retention is another key outcome for schools that have implemented Pulse over time. As you can see, by closely monitoring student performance on a daily basis, retention increased as well. So John and I are both available via email. Here's our email addresses to talk to you more about Pulse and set up a discovery call or demo. You can also get more information at our website, accountabilitypulse.com, where you can request a demo there as well. And thank you, Lisa, and thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks, Brian, for sharing that information, and to Pulse for sponsoring this webinar. So to get into the presentation with our panel members, I'd like to introduce who is on the panel today. Krista, great, thank you. So we have Chris Davidson, who is the superintendent of public schools of Calumet, Laurium, and Keweenaw, the northernmost K-12 district in Michigan. Dave Eichberg, superintendent of Bering Springs Public Schools, is joining us through the chat today. Krista Green and Chris Harrington are both with Michigan Virtual and are the leads in the research for this project. Will Heath, superintendent of Portland Public Schools, and Tim Throne, superintendent of Oxford Community Schools, are on. And I'm hoping that, I haven't checked the participants recently, but Dave Tebow, who is the 5th Michigan Co-op district to participate in the study, was going to try to jump on today as well. So throughout the webinar, feel free to put your questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them either there. Chris Harrington and Dave Eichberg will be monitoring that chat. And then we can also open it up for verbal questions at some point as well. So let's go ahead and get to it. I'd like to start with Krista. Krista, can you share with us how this report is a follow-up to previous work in regards to student-centered learning that Michigan Virtual is doing?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Our first study was really just focused on what student-centered learning is and why it's important. With this study, we really wanted to take a deeper dive into Michigan school districts and figure out and explore why student-centered learning is important to them, challenges they've experienced, and really focusing on the support that school leaders can provide teachers as they're making that shift as well. We also have a blog series that we've written over the past 2 years, and it follows the same course, exploring the same topics, just a little bit deeper.
Okay, thank you. Chris Harrington, can you tell us a little bit about the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and your role in the K-12 education system?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us, Lisa. Really appreciate it. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces here in the room as well. Yeah, the Research Institute is actually a part of Michigan Virtual. It was formed in 2012, and the whole purpose of the Institute was really to help expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models. And we do that through research, different kinds of research, quantitative, qualitative, some of the real detailed and intricate research, and some of it just a lot of anecdotal and sharing of best practices. And our focus is really around online and blended learning. But we've recently really scaled up in the area of student-centered learning, which certainly incorporates some of the online and blended components. But we are a nationally recognized thought leader. So while our work is really rooted in Michigan, we do a lot of work throughout the entire United States. And so, yeah, we're really charged with the task of helping all schools throughout the state of Michigan raise their ability to design, implement, and sustain innovative learning models.
Thanks for sharing that, because that was one question I was going to ask, was that the study was Michigan specific, but Michigan Virtual, as you mentioned, does do work national-wide, the research through that. So that's good to know. Krista, can you tell us a little bit about the student-centered learning study itself and why there was that need for that study?
Yeah, sure. When we designed the research study itself, we focused on the following 5 questions. It was really important for us, and we felt it was important for the field to really hear the story of those who are here in Michigan doing this work, rather than just focusing on that national broader perspective, which is the approach we took with our first study. So we focused on, how are Michigan teachers implementing these tenets of student-centered learning, voice, choice, competency-based learning progressions, and the continuous monitoring of student data. We focused on, the support that can be provided to teachers, challenges they've faced, positive outcomes that they have achieved or that they hope to achieve, and then how technology kind of fits into that and can help. When we decided, when we were thinking about how we could answer those questions, we developed kind of a 2-prong approach. We developed a digital survey, and then we also developed interview questions. So thankfully, we were able to partner with the Michigan Co-op, and we were able to pull in Berrien Springs, Hamilton, Oxford, Portland, and the public schools of CLK. We chose those school districts specifically because we felt like that would really give us both a demographically and geographically diverse population of students and of school district administrators and teachers. And we did interview not only teachers, but building and district administrators through many interviews that we did. And we organized in the report, we organized our findings really around 4 main areas. So why and how student-centered learning is being implemented, challenges, and then a big focus on the support that teachers need from school leaders, which I know the superintendents will be excited to share about shortly.
Great, thank you. So let's go ahead then and hear from the superintendents. We have a few questions, but remember to go ahead and ask questions in the chat as well. The first question, I think we'll start with Will, and I'd like all the superintendents to chime in that were within the study. But what is your vision for student-centered learning at your school or within your school district? So Will, if you want to go ahead and start.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Lisa. So hi, I'm Will Heath, Superintendent in Portland. Of the school districts that were interviewed from this, Portland's probably the earliest in this process, I would say. We're a very traditional school district. Over the past 6 years, we have been making some changes based on needs of students. And that's where student-centered learning comes into play. So we've done a lot of work to try to figure out some of the bright spots within the district and how to grow those. For us, it's about solving problems. And before COVID, there were plenty of problems to solve. Post-COVID, there seems to be more. And so we're looking at student-centered learning as being a way to really reach our students, to get that performance level up, to help them through their path. We want as many options and opportunities for students to show their competency in school. And so this is that path that we're going. Each school district will talk about kind of a different way that we handle this. For us, we are growing our bright spots within the district. Some areas, some teachers are already doing some of this work. There are some programs that focus in on that. But for us, we have a tendency to start young and then work our way up. And so we're looking at the elementary level. We have a pretty robust DK and K program. And that DK and K program, we've always struggled at trying to figure out ways to really identify the kids when they come in and then how to progress them through. And so that is kind of where we'll start, and then it'll grow from there.
Tim?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Throne, Superintendent of Oxford Community Schools. Similar to Will, for Oxford, at the end of the day, our vision is really to help all of our students reach their maximum potential. And we've specifically outlined 3 areas, not only academics, but arts and athletics. Our community has made it very clear to us that all three of these areas are equally as important. And as students, I think at the end of the day, try to figure out what their passions are, what they want to pursue in life. Student-centered learning helps to drive those discoveries for each and every student. So, whether you're in kindergarten or already in high school, really we're trying to help each of our students determine their passions and not only answer that age-old question of what do I want to be when I grow up, but maybe more importantly, who do I want to be when I grow up?
Go ahead, Chris Davidson.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. Chris Davidson, CLK Schools. Very similar there with Will and Tim. I think for us, though, I think CLK Schools, my predecessor did an amazing job with creating choices for students, knowing that not every student learns the same way. And so building programs, online programs, partnership programs to provide options. But what we really wanted to focus in, and this was more a driving force of COVID, was that we wanted more choices, more options for students within the traditional setting. So, we knew we have a challenge. We need to find ways to cultivate the unique gifts and talents and interests that all of our students have. And we felt like creating a more flexible learning environment for students to do that, starting young at the elementary level, as Will kind of noted, but then also at our upper grade levels, really focusing on building in some more student voice and choice into how they learn and what they learn in the classes. So that's kind of where we're at this point in time, where we want to go.
Great. Dave T, do you want to chime in with your vision?
I would not add too much to what these amazing superintendents have already said, other than, I think we talk about thriving and that being an open-ended thing for kids when they leave, and having the skills and the tools and that content knowledge to be able to go out and continue to learn no matter what's next. And we really want to redefine how kids are measured. And you can't redefine how kids are measured if you don't drive the bus with kids at the center versus, teachers teaching to a test or some of those things that kind of are happen. So what gets measured gets done. And so we've spent a lot of time changing what we're measuring. And that's kind of the next step of how we transition this and redefining success for a student when they walk out of our system. And as more than just a test score or a GPA or a number. And to do that, you have to have kids that can reflect, that can self-assess, that can give and receive feedback. And so when you do that, that really, you have to shift it to the student being at the center versus the teacher. So our vision is that our kids own their learning and they leave us with the skills, tools that they need to do whatever is next. And we aren't putting, or trying not to put value on what is next for that kid, and letting the kid find the value of what their next step is.
Great, thank you. So where are you in terms of your work towards becoming student-centered, and where do you need to go next? Tim, why don't you go ahead and start with that one?
Dave, that was a great summary. I'll say it this way too. I think taking all of what Dave just said, at the end of the day, if our students can leave Oxford having learned how they themselves learn, they can take themselves anywhere where they want to go, as well as learning what their own personal passions are, what they want to pursue. I think when you combine those two things together, whether it's to continue on in school at a college level, or go right into trades or something like that, that also is incredibly value of students learning not only what they want to do, but what they don't want to do. Oxford has really tried from a systemic standpoint to tackle student-centered learning in all formats. So, gosh, we probably started our IB certifications of our traditional face-to-face schools. Boy, I don't know, maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago, not sure, maybe even longer than that. But so all of our traditional schools, seated schools, are IB schools, and that is how we drive our student centered approaches. Our virtual academy is now 11 or 12 years old, and the same type of thing through our virtual academy. We try to drive the student centered approach. I would say it this way, sort of listening to the intro of that software program. I think that what we have learned over time is a couple of things. One, very rarely or small percentages do you find where all students, fit a certain profile. What I mean by that is, really a hybrid approach for every student, and allowing them to determine how much face-to-face, how much virtual, and those types of things, to be able to move back and forth within those worlds is really the sweet spot. You'll see a lot of reports out there that say, 100% virtual is terrible. 100% seated doesn't give kids opportunities. And I don't know, I think for us, what we've drawn from that, even especially during the pandemic, was that the more that we can allow students to drive how much they need of both environments from a physical standpoint, the engagement and the achievement levels go up. I think the last thing that I would say from a district perspective is that, boy, when you are driving a school district, you've got a lot of employees. A lot of times school districts are the biggest employer in the district. Sometimes not, but they definitely are involved in that community perspective of where the community wants to go and their expectations. And so if you want to achieve anything at scale, I think the key is alignment. And so for us, I've been asked, even just a couple of weeks ago, I was at one of our staff meetings at one of our buildings, face-to-face buildings, and they asked me, Tim, do you think we will stay IB, or are we going to continue IB? And my question was absolutely yes. Just like we are going to plan to continue our virtual offerings and our hybrid offerings of everywhere in between. And the reason being is that gives us alignment throughout our district, independent of building type, independent of student type, by just driving in on that alignment. That is what I think really allows you to achieve anything at scale. And so, a lot of times we start out by doing small things here or there, and yeah, that may be how we have to go to implement. But if you're visioning, looking down the road to do anything at scale, the better you are aligned from a district perspective, I think the much more quickly you will find that achievement.
Thank you. Chris or Will, where you are in terms of your work becoming student-centered, and then where do you need to go next?
So as I mentioned, sorry, Chris, you want to go? All right. So I mentioned earlier that, Portland's probably early on in this process. We do have a lot of bright spots in the district. We developed programs in the past. We developed programs based on the need that is established by a group of students. And if the group was large enough, then we would develop a program to fit the need for that. So our alternative ed, our virtual school, all the way down to, elementary and our developmental kindergarten program, early college program for our fifth year, high school kids, all those programs are developed. And the problem with that is that we developed them for groups of kids. And so that wasn't the individual kid in mind, but then it's almost always an all or nothing option for students. So you're either an early college kid or you're not, or you're in DK and you don't have an opportunity to leave DK, or you went virtual and you're not coming back. And so for the district, taking these programs that we have that are quite successful and blending them so that a student has more opportunities to flow, for our district to be more fluid. I think kind of what Tim was hitting on is that, being all virtual for a kid may not work. Allowing the kid to have that opportunity to pick and choose the pieces that work within our system to develop their program, how they will learn here at Portland is the best thing for us. So where we're at now, we have a lot of really good programs in place, and where we go in the future is working on blending those programs so kids have more opportunities, and it's just not an all or nothing choice.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, yeah. So real quick, I guess, yeah, where we were heading into this was extremely slow process. Kind of following the 5 layers of Marzano and his work. And we started with creating that safe collaborative learning environment. That was our big focus, our building block, our foundation. Brought in capturing kids' hearts, put a lot of time and effort into the social emotional aspect. And I think on that track, it would have been a long haul and we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are now. So I think we started a slow process. I'll give kudos to the pandemic for really pushing us along and getting us over a big hump. And so where we're at now, we have a pilot program in our elementary. I talked about creating that flexible environment that doesn't exist for us in the elementary level. Parents wanted face-to-face after the pandemic. They weren't all happy with what online looked like. So how do you meet kids with where they're at? Because that's what they enjoyed about online, but they wanted the face-to-face and in-person instruction. So we created a more flexible learning program called CLK Engage, focusing on English and mathematics and meeting kids where they're at in the learning of those 2 cores. And so we're doing that right now, grades 1, 2, and 3. In the meantime, I know our middle school level is going to be prepping for that as that grows out over the next 2 years. But then we're really looking at connecting kids to the learning, right? Looking at place-based, project-based. We see those as our entry points at the middle and high school levels of connecting our kids to the learning, getting them to engage in that learning process, and then try to kind of build and grow towards standards and competency-based through those entry points and place-based and project-based. So that's where we're at and where we're headed.
Yeah. So through that then, Chris, why don't you start? What has been your biggest challenge in terms of making that learning student-centered?
I think the 2 biggest challenges we faced, after last year, teachers were exhausted. During last year, teachers were exhausted, right? So being able to capitalize on what we were learning from the pandemic, right? We saw a lot going on. We had parents choosing all sorts of different options. We partnered with Oxford on a blend homeschool virtual blend program, which was a huge hit. And so we learned a lot from what our parents wanted, right? And that was that ability to honestly meet their kids with where they're at. So we found ourselves a month into school purchasing higher levels of math, or maybe even lower levels of math, because that's where their kids were, and we had the flexibility then to do that. So the challenge was, now how do you take a more traditional model, because all of our teachers wanted to be back to normal this year, right? But my worry was, you go back to normal, we're going to miss the boat. We're going to miss that opportunity to make that crucial change and capitalize on where we're at. So found I'll say a special group of teachers at all levels that were willing to take on more work because they saw the potential. They saw what we were seeing. and wanted to be able to build something, create something for those kids to return back to our brick and mortar program. So, that was, I think, the biggest challenge was identifying the right group of teachers that could take that on at the moment. Because there's a lot going on, not pushing my teachers too hard, but also getting them to realize, this is our opportunity. If we don't capitalize on it now, it could be another 5 years before we are able to get to where we are now. And so I think that was the biggest challenge, right? And now I think that challenge is not allowing folks to get back into that comfort zone, right? We learned so much. Now we got to keep moving forward and keeping that progress going is our current challenge.
Okay, great. Tim, how about your biggest challenge through all of this?
I liked what Chris said in that, we tell our kids a lot of times, learning takes place during that time of reflection. And how much have we allowed ourselves as well as our staff to stop and reflect on the last 18 months and determine what we ourselves have learned? In some regards, I don't know as if we've done a good enough job of that. We've just kept our head down and just kept plowing through. I think that what we have learned is that there's definitely our community said, yeah, we want face-to-face learning, but we also don't want to give up these other opportunities and be able to extend our learning or narrow our different paths that our students may want to take. We've actually added another CTE course, allowing students to be paramedics and that kind of stuff. And so that was a huge hit. And so we're really trying to leverage this time to reflect not only what our students are telling us, but what our parents and community are telling us too. Local employers continue to tell us, what they want. This little, monogram back here is our portrait of a graduate. And I think that it took us a couple of years to bring that to fruition. But I am so thankful that we took the time, and it took us almost 2 full years to develop that K-12, implement it. We had every employee sign off on it in their building. What that allowed us to do is during the pandemic, we just kept going right back to that portrait of graduate. All of the work that you're doing, all of the time that you're putting in, is it driving us towards producing this portrait or is it not? And so I think right now our where we're at is we need to just pause, reflect. And I think that in order to continue the alignment piece, I see us making some investments of probably not only on the tech side, but maybe a majority on the tech side, in that aligning and bringing disparate systems that have grown up over the pandemic, the last 18 months, bringing those tools and everything in together to where we make sure that we're still trying to be as efficient as possible in our teaching and learning. So that's sort of where we're at right now.
Well, how about your challenges?
Yeah, so for us, Portland is a pretty traditional community, and I do not actually have a lot of push from the community to change things in a way. Our drive for this is more internal, and recognizing that we have student engagement problems. We have COVID created, we had gaps before COVID. The gaps that we see now post-COVID are, if we can say post-COVID, but a year plus of this has shown that, like, we have concerns as a staff on how we educate our students. And so there's a greater need for us to make some of this change, because we know in the future, it's going to be really hard for us to educate. Going back to the way we used to educate is not really an option. So for us, one of the challenges is getting the support of the community and helping them understand that we do need to make some of these changes. I'm not overly concerned about that. I think we will get there with that. Once they see success, they like success. But for us as a district, I have to build that support within the district. And so I have some teachers who see this and staff that see this, admin and stuff that see this, and I have others that don't. And so I have a time problem, but it's two different time problems. One, I need time with those who see it so they can learn more and get the support they need. And a lot of that is one-on-one time. So we've implemented some of that within the district this year. We hired 2 elementary STEM teachers that freed up the teachers during some time so that they could work with our director of elementary education. But then I have the other time issue of where I have the ones who don't quite see the need right now. I need to spend time with them to help them see that need, to show them. We talk about tripping over the truth. And so that the only way people really own it is if they actually trip over the truth. You have to see it and feel it. And so finding the time for that. So the time issue on both ends, one, supporting the ones that are wanting to make that push forward, and then helping the other ones see that really the future of education is this direction. We have to do this. It isn't really an option. And COVID kind of put us on the fast track. And this is something that, Tim and Chris have talked about taking a long time, and it's a slow progress, and you don't want to rush it. But COVID and what we're dealing with right now has really pushed the timeline on that.
Mm-hmm. And I think what you said about educators having to see it, we hear that all the time. And Chris Harrington, you can probably speak to that from around the country, that educators are out when administrators say we want to move towards competency-based education, or we want to move toward more student-centered learning. And they ask, what does that look like? So I think that's really important that districts go and visit one another. And many of the Michigan Co-op districts have gone to visit other schools like Kettle Moraine, or places that have career academies or different models, and they come back inspired. Not that they copy what the other one does, but that they now are able to apply it to their specific district. But Chris, do you want to speak to that for a second?
Yeah, I agree. Going out and having conversations and feeling what's going on in a school or a district that is practicing student-centered learning is really important. It's interesting because when you walk around in a school and that is practicing student-centered learning in a more developed program, the classroom itself doesn't necessarily look very different. Like there's kids, there's desks, there's resources. It's how the teachers are interacting with the kids. It's the degree of ownership the kids are taking in their own learning. And it's the supports across the entire school building or school district. So visiting a school is important, but it's also having that conversation with those people who are making student-centered learning a reality in that school or district. That's a critical piece as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I'll just jump in and add to that. So I've had the pleasure of visiting Oxford and Berrien Springs and seeing what they do. And when you look at student-centered learning, it really is a district-driven thing. What we do in Portland will always look different than Oxford, Berrien Springs, Hamlet, any school district, because it's student-centered, and our students are slightly different than any other one's students, and our community needs are slightly different. But the ability to go and see a district, look at like Oxford and go down and look at OVA and walk through that and really get an eye opener from that, and then be able to take that back and say, okay, I'm not going to develop it OVA up north. That's not going to happen. But how do I take some of the things that I saw and what will work for our students? What is the need of our students? And taking those little pieces, the more you visit, the more you see. And it really is an eye opener. And it makes you think, I can do it. And if I struggle, I have someone I can call and they can help me through it.
Dave Tebow, do you want to add anything about the biggest challenge that you have been running into? I know you've been at this, you've shared with us before how you hit the ground running, 10 years ago, and then you look back and your staff was still back there. So you want to talk a little bit about those kind of challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to go slow to go fast. And I think, and I said it in the chat, I think painting a picture of what's possible is one of the biggest challenges, right? We have romanticized education, and I think it's, who was it that called it nostalgia and amnesia? We shove those things together, and we remember school in a certain way, and we can remember all the good things, right, that we want, but then we forget all the stuff that sucked, right? And so when you have nostalgia, it's hard to get people to envision something better, enhanced, because then there's this blame and the shame that comes along with this, right? When you're navigating change management, I mean, we are all right now as school leaders navigating a human dynamic of fear and change and misinformation, and trying to get our teachers to try to do something different. We haven't changed the metric by which they're measured, but we want them to be different, and then we want them to trust us that it's going to be an enhancement. And they're saying, well, what's broken and why was this bad? And it's not that this was bad, it's that we know more and we can always be better. And so how you deliver that and how that lands on people and how that's received by parents and the community in general is a really touchy subject. And so we're navigating human behavior right now that is changing due to a pandemic. And it's so nuanced that I think that's the struggle everybody has, is how do you become great when you're good, right? Good's the enemy of great, right? Because we don't want to take that leap and we have to do something different. And it's hard. It's hard. Chris said it. Like, I said to my teachers at the beginning of this year, last year was hard and you did two jobs. You taught face-to-face and you taught virtual all year long. And this year is going to be harder. And everybody kind of went, yeah, whatever. I just had a think tank group with some teachers, and they were like, you're telling us the truth. Like, this is the hardest year I've ever had, because the expectation is different. And they know now what's possible because they did this blending of teaching last year. And they were like, oh my word, that was so good in so many ways, but it was so hard in so many ways. And I don't know that I have the human capacity in this pandemic to do that every single day, even though I know it's got value for my students and it's a better way of doing this. It's so hard to get up and do it every day, right? And so we're asking them to be super people in a time when they have fear, when their cheese has been moved, when they don't know, there's a loss of control, all of the different things that as a society we're dealing with. They're not just teachers, they're humans too. They're moms, they're dads, their brothers or sisters, they're community members, they're Republicans, they're Democrats, they're independents, they're all of the stresses and teaching school. And that's really hard. And so I think it's a change management piece, and it's navigating human behavior. It's like being a psychologist. Being a superintendent is like being a psychologist right now. And I'm not trained to be a psychologist, not anywhere close. And if people heard me say I'm a psychologist, they'd run screaming for the hills.
Thank you for that. So we have a lot of people on the call that are not necessarily in the Michigan Co-op right now. And so do you have advice for school leaders wanting to move towards student-centered learning models? Will, you want to start that one?
Go slow and get friends.
Get friends.
What Dave said, that's exactly right. I think there's a lot of things depending on what position you're in, but as a superintendent, it feels sometimes you have to be 200 steps ahead of everyone else and trying to make sure things come into play. And there are a lot of barriers that prevent this within a school district. Things like your contract, teacher contract, contact hours, things like that prevent you from putting some of this stuff into play. And in looking at some of those things, what's your teacher evaluation tool? What is it really measuring? How does your contract read? What can you do? What can't you do? Those are things that you start making change now for 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And so looking at taking a second and look and say, okay, what are our barriers And then how can I slowly work on some of those barriers to get rid of them so it's a little bit easier to make this change? And then I would just take some things that everyone's tired of doing. I have been playing around trying to do the perfect parent-teacher conference since I got to Portland. I still haven't figured it out yet, but I keep playing around with it because really parent-teacher conferences are worthless. It just doesn't work. And so we just keep trying to do different ways. I want it to be student-centered. What's the best way to do that? I'm trying to find the best way for Portland. But enough people in the district were like, are kind of tired of parent-teacher conferences. I said, well, here's an opportunity for me to play. And so find those areas where you can play, that you have support. I'm making some changes because it's broken. And so let's try to fix it. I think is a good way to get started with some of this stuff and then just grow from there.
Okay. Tim?
I just, yeah, from a district perspective, I think I won't go into all of it, but we have a 4B philosophy, and the first 2 B's are bring your best and become your best. And your people and your students have to believe that it starts with you, your board, and everybody else in between. That at the end of the day, if you want everybody to achieve their maximum potential, that also includes ourselves. And so what are we doing to become better? What are we learning? I think going back to, I think what Will said, when I first became a superintendent, my thought was I needed to be the #1 student and the #1 teacher. And I think as I'm nearing retirement, I'm going to add one more thing. As a district leader, whether you're a superintendent or a building leader, I think you got to be the #1 cheerleader in your building or your sphere of influence. There are, oh my lands, enough things out in this world to drag you down. You have to be, even though there's days you don't feel like it, you have to be the #1 cheerleader. And so I think going back also to one of those things that we're really, well, a couple of things from the pandemic. One, Will, yes, we are also changing our parent-teacher conferences. This year, while we brought some of them back in person, the majority of our teacher conferences were virtual, and our parents loved it. It was so hard for them to get to a certain school at a time and meet with a teacher during a certain time frame and all that kind of stuff. And so that's been beneficial. Bringing the student into the parent-teacher conference has been an eye-opener and an insight. Both of those things good. I think the other big area where we're really going to double down and make investments are in our I'll say our new teacher orientation. We're looking to rebuild that from scratch. So when a person comes in, whether they come in from another district, they've had teaching experience, or whether they're right out of college, boy, how important is it for them to understand the culture of Oxford and of their building? And we're really making huge investments, and that's probably from a system standpoint, that may be our biggest change that we make in the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Dave, I saw Dave Tebow nodding his head, and Dave Eichberg at Berrien Springs also made that comment in the chat that's their, one next thing that they're working on is that onboarding process. Like you said, the culture, how important that is, because that's not typically what they're going to get in it when they come from another district or from the teacher prep program.
I think that's a huge piece. They're not coming ready to teach in our system. They're just not. And MDE has created this new metric of how we're going to certify teachers again. And I think that is going to get in the way of student-centered teaching. I don't think that it's the right approach, and that's just me, and I'm probably wrong. But that's the piece, that orientation piece. Like we've built this cohort that is piloting student-centered classroom, and we've got coaches that are working with them. But what we're building in this cohort year is the new onboarding orientation process for new teachers, so that we're building the internal professional development that our new teachers are going to need, so they get it from day one, because higher ed isn't teaching them student-centered practices. They're not embedding. Now, if you frame it right, there are things that they're being taught that can be put together, and tools that can be put in a toolkit that are helpful. But as a whole, it's still a very teacher-centered delivery model. And I think that's the change piece too. You go back to, how do we change this thing? It's that we have to have teachers and parents and community members and businesses understand what it feels like to be a learner in a student-centered model versus a teacher-centered model. Because one of the biggest breakthrough moments we had was we created student profiles for every board member we have. And we took our board members through a traditional lesson and then a student-centered lesson. And when you put them through a traditional lesson and you put the student with an IEP for a learning disability and you make it so it's readable, so as an educated board member, you try to read this and you can't read and then answer the questions that you're asked to answer because it's one size fits all. You watch a group of people, some who have skill sets fly, and some sit and just struggle and are frustrated because they don't have the tools. That becomes emotional for them. They've experienced it in a way that they didn't experience school before, and it opens them to say, maybe we can do this differently. Maybe we can enhance learning. And then you show how technology doesn't replace a teacher, it enhances a teacher. It allows us to meet the student where they are, and it allows us to put accommodations in place so that each can get to a specific level and they can thrive. I don't think we do this without giving emotional experiential moments to people who have defined education as education has always been. That to me is the game changer of how do we move this forward. It has to be an emotional moment. You have to show somebody what it feels like to learn differently than you, to create empathy for the diversity of what we need to offer.
Thank you.
There's hiring practices, and I saw it in the chat, like, how do we do hiring practices? In Portland, we've changed our hiring practices. Traditionally we would hire probably the smartest person that would walk in the room. And now we're hiring the person who sees some of this vision and is willing to grow and can learn. And so that's a totally different way to hire somebody. All of our hiring practices are questions, how we do it. It's all changed. We changed it all that way, but it doesn't do us any good to hire somebody who has potential. So we're basically hiring on potential, unless we have the support network to be there. And so just like Dave Tebow was talking, like, you need to develop a system where you can support them. Anyone who knows me knows that if I can't rely on someone else to do it, we're just going to do it ourselves. And so we just take it on, and probably to our own fault, we take too much stuff on. But we're at that point, and you're going to get to that point in a district where you have to train your teachers to teach the way you need them to teach. Can't rely on Michigan State, which is right down the road, and you can't always rely on their backgrounds, even if they come in from another district. And so you have to build that support network. Support network means more people, which means you have to develop the people who are supporting your teachers. It's a lot of levels to do it. One of my ISD one of my ISD workers is on the call right now, in like reaching out to your ISD and seeing who they have as instructional coaches and making sure they're involved every step in the process, so that when they come in, they're not talking a different message than you are, and they can help you do that. Those are the things that can really help. And I encourage everyone, change your hiring practices. Hire people who you can grow and figure out a way to grow them. And it sounds like Hamilton's figured out a good process there.
Chris Davidson, what about your advice?
Oh boy, I guess I don't know if I have any great advice beyond what all my colleagues had just put, to be honest. Same struggles here, growing and developing. And that's I'll go back to one of our challenges. That's the next challenge too, is supporting our teachers, onboarding more teachers along this, and how are we going to keep growing it? Because, well, we're isolated. There is no Michigan State. We don't have anyone up here to go lean on and support. So we're gonna build it in-house. That's what we do. I guess a couple of notes I did wrote down for this as far as advice goes. I look back at our process, and I mentioned it before, that catalyst, right? What's that turning point? to head down this path and get the teachers and the people on board that you need to do it. I think that was key. Being aware of that, seeing it, and then capitalize on it, getting the right people in place, and then kind of a change where we've always been more of a top-down kind of approach to things, and knew that wasn't going to cut it. To go down this path, that it had to be grown and developed from our teachers and those that were in the trenches. And so giving them the space and the time and the resources to develop that, let my admin run with ideas, I think has probably been the best thing we've done in this approach, in this transition to more student-centered learning, is letting our teachers grow the program, come up with the ideas, and we as administrators help support and foster that growth and that development. So yeah, I guess that's the best I got.
Yeah. What I hear from all of you saying is that to move to this student-centered learning is really more than a superintendent's vision. It really has to filter down into staffing. The staff, that everybody needs to be on that same page and be looking at that. You may set the vision, but it's all the others in the district that are implementing it and getting them to see that vision and to actually take action to make that happen. And I think that's one of the things that's so important about with like the Michigan Co-op. People will say, well, but it's a district membership. And I'm like, exactly, it's a district membership, because if you're moving to student-centered learning, your district should be moving to student-centered learning, not just your administrators, but everybody in that district needs to see and be moving in that direction. I have one more question for Krista, but do we have other things that you guys want to say? The superintendent's last parting wisdom, words, challenges?
I'll throw out this. I won't charge you anything extra, Lisa. I'll just throw this in for free. But for the districts that are represented today, I think I would just remind us all that, man, has it been difficult to even hire new people? How many open positions do districts have on average across the board? All that kind of stuff. And while it's not easy to go down this road, at the end of the day, I think that the culture that you build in your district is a huge competitive advantage. And I think you will draw experienced teachers from other districts, as well as new teachers coming into the field. They will want to come to your school based on that culture. Back in the day, I think technology was a competitive advantage of depending upon what you had in your district and how that would help in recruiting of new teachers. But I think today, culture trumps that. And that if you put into play a healthy culture of student-centered learning, you'll be more apt to attract those teachers, to help them move forward. So for whatever it's worth, I know it's not easy, and I 100% agree with Thibault, and that, gosh, it comes down to change management, and probably 0 teachers, 0 building principals, and 0 superintendents have had any classes in change management. 0. And so, but if you're gonna drive your district, move your district, it takes a lot of those skills. And so, I don't know, maybe that's some internal courses we can look to develop for our own people, for our own administrators, our own teachers, not just ourselves.
I'll give my favorite piece of advice when it comes to working with students, when it comes to really truly being, we always say we make our decisions based on what's best with students. If you're having conversations with what students need, remove the word "or" out of your talk, it's always should be an and, always focus on the and. It should never be an or question with kids, especially when you're trying to do student-centered learning. And so start at your admin level, teacher groups, and just just when someone throws out an or, always just push back. Is there an and? And that will help drive some of this discussion.
Dave, would
Yeah.
you please let the State Board of Ed as well as MDE get that advice?
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Well, that's perfect. I mean, we that's like it. We don't say or. It's always and, because then it becomes about winning and losing, right? And nothing that we're doing is about winning or losing, or one thing being right and another thing being wrong. This is take Simon Sinek, right? We play the infinite game. This isn't a finite game. This is a long game, and we're always going to constantly get better. And we have to create the conditions for psychological safety for all of our stakeholders, students, teachers, parents, administrators, communities, business, right? And as we're growing and changing, people have to feel psychologically safe. And at the same time, we know learning happens when we go between comfort and uncomfort, right? We know that it's that back and forth that helps us grow. And you have to do it in a way that's psychologically safe. And Lisa said it. I would say to anyone who's going to do this, you got to have people like this that are you have to lean into us. But I went fast and I turned around and the team wasn't there, right? Leadership isn't great idea, go fast, implement, shove. It's okay. Let's take a look at the culture. Let's understand where we're at. Let's assess the need. Let's engage the stakeholders. And I went too fast. And then I had to backtrack for 3 or 4 years to then go slow incrementally. And I had to overcome some of the mistakes I made. So I would say go slower so you can go fast at the end. But you've got to build that understanding and that feel of safety and culture so that everybody can take the next step that fits for them. But if we can work with the adults and model for them the way we want the adults to work with the students, then we've created a condition and a space where they have a better understanding of how this lands on the learner. And as an adult, when it lands on the learner differently, they then have empathy to change practice and help support landing on the students in a different way.
Mhm. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, this is just that. And I just want to go back. I'm going to reiterate what Will had commented on about, you can't replicate what someone else is doing. And so it brought up, but I think it's worth drilling home because it was some sticking points along the way, a lot of sticking points for us. We connected our folks with Westminster, Colorado, and we've been to Kettle Moran in Wisconsin, right? We've gone out, we've gotten a look or a feel for what they're doing, and we come back and they say, well, that's not us. That's not going to work here. I can't do that and this, and it becomes like almost like this automatic barrier. But to really look at, okay, we know what we want to accomplish. We know why student-centered is so important. It's not supposed to look like anybody else. It's supposed to look like CLK's model. It's supposed to look like Hamilton's model or Oxford's model, right? And I really think that is the key for anyone going down this path and in those initial phases, to not let that be a barrier. That's natural. Your teachers aren't going to envision this right out of the bat because they don't know what it looks like. And as a leader, I didn't know what it looked like, so it's hard to say, here's my vision. I don't know what it really looks like. It's just a vision. But to get them there and get over those hurdles, that was really important. Again, empowering those teachers to come up with that, but not allowing that, well, that's not going to work with us, be that roadblock. Well, okay, how can we accomplish it? How are we going to accomplish what we need to accomplish? What can we learn? What are some takeaways, right? And so there'll be little bits and pieces, I think, from every other program we've learned from them, but it'll never be the same. And so I say, don't get stuck on that. Keep forging ahead. It's worth the work.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Chris and Krista, are there plans to continue this work and do more studies with student-centered learning?
Yeah, so last year we really feel like we only grazed the surface with these schools. So our study for next year is going to take a deeper dive into 3 of the school districts in the form of case studies, really focusing on the impact that student-centered learning can have on student engagement and achievement, as well as hopefully providing on-ramps for other school districts. So we're really excited.
When do you think that'll be published?
They're going to come out, there'll be 3 different case studies as well as an implication section, and they'll come out starting, I believe in February, one a month.
Oh, okay, so they're not all, they won't all be combined like this one was, they'll be separate.
Correct, yep.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, I really appreciate everyone being able to make the call. Like I said, this will be recorded and we will have it on the Michigan Co-op website if you want to share it out with other districts that you know. And I thank all the panel members for being on and for Michigan Virtual Research Team to do this study with us. So
Thank you, Lisa.
Yep. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.